Welcome to the I24 News Desk. I'm Benita Levine, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. We start with breaking news here in the Middle East. Israel says Russia is responsible for the GPS disruptions at Ben-Gurion airport in Tel Aviv last week, affecting some planes while trying to land. Now that's according to reports on Israeli Defense Force radio Galei Tzahal. Now over the past 3 weeks, pilots from all over the world have been complaining of GPS disruptions when they tried to touch down in Israel. Earlier this week, the International Union of Pilots issued a travel warning to Israel, saying it should be aware of the possible risk, avoid distractions, and plan accordingly. Ben-Gurion officials responding that a crew accompanies the planes at takeoff and landing, and that at no point was there a safety hazard. A senior security Israeli official is traveling to a country in Europe to consult with U.S. representatives on how to stop these disturbances. In the last few moments, a Russian source telling I24 News these reports are fake news. Well, for more on this breaking news story and a look at the implications, we're joined in studio by international relations expert Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Dr. Navon, as always, thank you so much for being here in studio. Dramatic developments with the story. We need to point out a Russian source has spoken to I24 News, calling it fake news. I want to look at what we do know so far and just say, in terms of this landing GPS disturbances, what do you make of it?
So first of all, as you mentioned, the Russians right now deny any involvement, but of course we need to be always skeptical with what the Russians call fake news and their concept of real and fake news. But in any case, assuming there was a Russian involvement in this incident, as Israel claims, I think we can understand it in the background of the tension between Russia and Syria and Israel in Syria. In other words, we know that there have been many Israeli sorties in Syria against Iranian targets, and in at least one instance, a Russian jet was downed by Israel. And so I think it might be also a warning of Russia towards Israel, saying we can also disturb your air ability in Syria. Because, of course, Israel, as I said, is very active in Syria, so is Russia, and there have been incidents between the two air forces.
When claims like this happen, what does it do for the concerns around a cyber war in this region?
I think mostly it points out to the complexity of relations between Israel and Russia. We had just a couple of days ago this unprecedented summit in Jerusalem between the Israeli Prime Minister and the national security advisors of the United States and of Russia. So on the face of it, it looks like you have this very close cooperation or coordination, at least between Russia and Israel. But in the background, we do have a very conflicting interest between the two countries. We just mentioned Syria, and despite the fact that the Russians did send a national security advisor for this summit in Israel, despite the fact that there's a direct communication line between Moscow and Jerusalem, at the end of the day, Russia does support the countries and organizations in the Middle East that are mostly generally hostile to Israel, whether it is, of course, Assad in Syria, whether it is the very complex relation between Russia and Iran, and the fact that Russia is much more supportive of the Shia axis in the Middle East, as opposed, of course, to the Sunni one supported by the United States, and the fact, of course, that Russia is in favor of maintaining the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, denies Israel many of Israel's claims regarding Iran's subversive actions in the Middle East. So I think this incident does point out to the fact that despite the communication line that is open between Jerusalem and Moscow, at the end of the day, the bottom line is that Israel and Russia continue to have very conflicting interests in the region.
Notwithstanding the fact, of course, of this tight relationship, it seems, in terms of communication between Vladimir Putin and Benjamin Netanyahu, we've seen Netanyahu get on a plane and go to Moscow at very short notice. What does this mean for their relationship?
I think, again, this relationship is beneficial today to Israel because, Russia was basically an enemy of Israel during the Cold War. I mean, it supported the Arab countries. It sent an airlift to Egypt and Syria during the Yom Kippur War. Today, the situation has much changed. I mean, there is, as I said, not only diplomatic relations between the two countries, but a direct communication line between Netanyahu and Putin. And as you mentioned, it happens pretty often that Netanyahu just drops in Russia to coordinate things with Putin. And I think there is also a personal relationship between the two leaders. I think Putin does respect Netanyahu, and I think it's mutual. But at the end of the day, as I said, the interests of Russia and Israel in the Middle East are not the same. And Russia is not and never will be Israel's ally. It continues to be a great power that undermines the U.S. interest in the Middle East and of course also Israeli interests. So the reality is complex. Very different interests, clashing interests very often between Israel and Russia, but also a direct communication line. But I think this incident, if it is proven to be true, does point out to a very worrying tendency in Russia's policy in the Middle East.
And practically, Dr. Navon, the fact is for a passenger hearing reports like this, whether it turns out to be fake news or not in terms of who's behind it, it is a little bit worrying for people who would want to be flying in and out of Ben-Gurion. What does Israel do to circumvent these kind of fears?
Well, Israel is a cyber superpower, as we know. So if there is any country in the world where people should feel safe about this, it is definitely Israel. Israel is known for its cutting-edge technology, its ability to face cyber attacks. So, as I said, if there's one country in the world where people should feel safe about this, it is Israel.
International relations expert Dr. Emmanuel Navon is always